Okay, I'll sit here. That's what I'll do. Welcome all. So the developing story as we sit here in Washington, Steve Schmidt, is that it looks like the deal to keep the government open and raise the debt ceiling is back into the court of the Senate, where the leaders seem to be moving towards some kind of conclusion. So the end game is coming, some kind of deal, one hopes before Thursday. Let's talk about what's next, the fallout from this, from your point of view.
Well, first we'll simply move from this crisis to the next crisis. And what we're talking about here is fundamentally the unthinkable in the entire history of the country. And the notion that the United States of America would default on its full faith and credit. People have analogized this to the end of the world, unthinkable. The entire history of the country. This is a self-inflicted political crisis where the Republican Party has seen the fastest free fall since Felix Baumgartner jumped out of his space capsule last year and plummeted to Earth at the speed of sound. So one of the remarkable things is when you look at the numbers for Republicans, is you still have some members like Ted Cruz out there saying we're winning. And the ability to look at what's gone on, to look at that red chair and to insist it's blue, is a sign of terrible dysfunction inside the conservative movement in the Republican Party. And I would also say that when you look at the issue at hand, the full faith and credit of the country, that this isn't conservative. Conservatism requires you to pay your bills. This is fundamentally radical. And we will pay a price that I don't think is yet clear as a party for this as we move forward into the midterm elections. We've already paid a price in the sense that we've lost 5-6 U.S. Senate seats over the last 2 election cycles that in fact would have had us in the majority in the United States Senate, but for these extreme candidates. So it will be interesting to watch it play out over the next month or so, but the Republican Party, as Peter King pointed out, and I think is the most important question, how is it that someone who's been in the United States Senate for 8 months was able to take the United States Senate and the entirety of the House of Republicans down this route, this dead-end strategy, inflicting such anxiety on the global markets, weakening the country in the eyes of our adversaries abroad, and leading to such a political disaster for the party? And I think it's a question that Republicans ought to spend some time contemplating.
Ramesh, you've thought a lot about this. You know Ted Cruz well, he's who he's speaking of. Do you have a different view of what happens next for Republicans and beyond?
Well, throughout this struggle, whenever anybody's asked me to predict what would happen next, I would tell them what I will tell you, which is you are asking me to predict the behavior of people who do not think more than a day ahead. So that's hard to do. So the question I think now is, look, some kids have to touch the hot stove. And some kids, not my own kids so far, but some kids have to touch it more than once. So is the prevailing interpretation among this decisive group of House Republicans, who aren't the true believers, the 15 to 20 House Republicans who truly believe this was the way to go, but the other 20 to 25 who just don't want the hassle of being attacked and having to defend that they're true conservatives, what do they take away from this? Do they take away, well, that wasn't a great idea, let's not do it again? Or do they take away, you know what, all of these conservatives that are attacking me, they say the problem was just that Boehner folded, the problem was McConnell folded, we were doing great until we were stabbed in the back. That's the question that determines what happens next.
David Plouffe, having been inside the White House, do you agree with Mayor Emanuel, who thinks that rather than have just, small deals ahead, that maybe Republicans getting through this are more willing to deal, more willing to work with the president?
Possibly. All this deal that's coming together tonight is going to do is buy us 2 or 3 more months. We're going to be right back in the soup again. Right. And you would think that they wouldn't want to touch the hot stove again. But there's no guarantee that we won't be right on the precipice of default again. Listen, I think if John Boehner and the House leadership were basically willing to say, on a fiscal and economic deal, the 50 or 60 most conservative members we're just not going to get. then I think you could have a deal. I do think that something, maybe not on the scale of the grand bargain that we try to do a couple times with Boehner, but something that would get some long-term entitlement savings, would do some spending right now on infrastructure, undertake a tax reform process that would help our economy be more competitive. I think there's 70, 75 votes in the Senate for that. I think there's probably 300 votes in the House for that the president would sign. And it needs to happen, because right now, the greatest threat to the American economy is not our competitiveness, our technology, our energy challenges. There's good news on all that front. It's our political system. It's unprecedented. It's never happened before in the history of the United States of America. And so right now, Washington's harming the economy, harming people. If they came together and did something even of a medium-sized nature, it could actually really help the economy. Mayor Emanuel talked about how important confidence is. Imagine what it would do to the economy if our leaders came together and did some smart things on the economy. That's going to require both parties. And one thing Democrats can't do is, it's fun to watch the Republicans squirm. They're bleeding all over the floor. But we still have governing to do. And so we also have to be willing to reach across the aisle and work with these guys and women where it's possible. So I wouldn't say I'm optimistic. I think there's a possible deal space here. I doubt the Republican Party wants to go through this again. So the question is, are all we going to do is the bare minimum, or are we going to seize this moment and try and do some things to help the economy? Because it's not like the economy is growing at 4%. It's not like unemployment's at 5%. We still have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of people really hurting out there, and the last thing they need is the people they send to Congress sticking it to them, and that's what's happening right now.
So Cornell, you start us off in a question for everybody. The president made a decision on this to say, on the debt ceiling, I'm not going to deal. I will not negotiate at all, trying to break this fever that has captivated Washington for the last couple of years. Is he on the winning end of this? Is he about to win this? And if so, politically, what does he do with that victory?
Well, a couple of things. One is, I really, before I go there, I really want to double down on a point that the mayor was making. And I'm to blame also. People like me and data are to blame also, because we've taken what was a backroom art of gerrymandering, and we've added sophisticated modeling to it. And now it's to the point where, you can say, you can put in an outcome of what district you want, and the models will spit out a district to give you that outcome. Not by county or by town, but my God, by neighborhood, almost house to house. So, I mean, the gerrymandering has been taken from an art to a science that is very, very, very unhelpful. I mean, when I used to work for this guy and we were both trying to make Dick Gephardt Speaker of the House, there were a lot more swing districts. If you look at from go back to '94 when they shut down the government, we had 79 districts back then where Bill Clinton carried, but they were held by GOP. Now we have 17. And part of that problem is, in fact, sort of what we're doing on the front end with the gerrymandering these districts, and we're gerrymandering these districts in a very sophisticated way, and at the exact same time where, frankly, the ghost of our past and tribal politics, racial politics, cultural uneasiness has come to a head because you've elected a black president. And I think that has created the perfect storm in Washington right now, where you have these entrenched districts and you do have this unease with, among a lot of these voters about sort of the cultural and direction of this country. In 2008, you had two countries. You had one that was comfortable with diversity and one that was not quite so comfortable with diversity. And I think a lot of that is what you're seeing at the head right now. So I shudder at what comes of our country if, in fact, we don't fix this process where the extremes on both ends of the party are in these completely safe districts, and this becomes our politics. Now, is the president winning? Oh my God! Every poll every day shows you that the president's winning, and this is where it matters, because it matters in states, and this is where I think sort of common sense Republicans are going to have to take control of the party. Look, I know Terry McAuliffe. Terry McAuliffe is a friend of mine. No Democrat should be winning Virginia in an off year by 10 points. And the Washington Post said, the GOP shutdown is lifting Terry McAuliffe. You have independents in Virginia right now blaming the Republicans by 15 points. And maybe not in the gerrymandered houses, but I think absolutely on the statewide. And you're going to see the impact of this. And in 2016, more importantly, how has this debate helped you win over any of the diverse coalition that is now the majority coalition?
Well, Ramesh, you want to add something on that, David?
No, I think in 2016 you already had a Republican Party that was, if not fatally, close to a challenge demographically in terms of the Electoral College, winning states like Nevada and Colorado, even Florida increasingly very hard. What they needed to do was heal themselves and begin to address not just some of those demographic challenges, but also with the middle of the electorate. You talked about the poll you did. You know, the president is president because he won the center of the electorate in 2008 and 2012. We did a great job on turnout, but people focus on that. But the real, victory was what we did with the center of the electorate. And this is gonna have some legs. And there's no doubt that Ted Cruz might be a laughingstock in Washington right now. But with the people who turn out in the Iowa Republican caucus and the South Carolina Republican primary, he's a hero. And so I think it's unlikely that they're going to nominate somebody in 2016 that's going to speak to the center of the electorate. And if you can't speak to the center of the electorate and you don't heal some of these demographic challenges and you run a campaign that's better suited for the 1950s than this decade, you're going to be in difficult shape.
But this is what's interesting to me about the Republican Party right now, because you have at least two Republican parties. You have the legacy that started under Bush about government, run amok, too much spending, too many bailouts. The government's doing things that it doesn't do well. And I just look, Ramesh and Steve, look at the responses so far. You've got Ted Cruz and Rand Paul. You've got Marco Rubio, right, on this continuum. And then Paul Ryan, who's more kind of been centrist on this, solution-oriented. And then you have Chris Christie, who said if he were in the Senate, he'd kill himself. So I look at this group on the stage in a Republican debate in Iowa and beyond, and I think about, the party is still getting over the fact that they said, well, we tried, your Mitt Romney. We tried your electable candidate, and look where that got us, Steve.
Well, that may be the result of this. If you look at this fight, it may preface the fight to come. You've already heard talk radio host Mark Levin say that the issue here is the weak-kneed Republicans who didn't stand with Ted Cruz. That's why this strategy has failed, not that it was a flawed strategy that made no sense. So we have two models. This isn't abstract to look at. So David points out, if you just look at the states that the Democrats have won in 6 of the last 6 elections, there are 242 electoral votes. Very difficult to win a national election when the goal is 270, and that's not counting Florida and Virginia and North Carolina, Colorado, states we used to be competitive in. So we have in New Jersey, we're about to see Chris Christie be reelected, likely with more than 30% of the African American vote, 65% of the middle of the electorate, really high numbers with women voters, and someone who's governed as a conservative. And then you see the results of this strategy played out in Washington. And my personal view is that there's no chance that a congressional Republican, anyone who's got the title congressman or senator out of either caucus, is a viable national candidate in a presidential election. It has to be a governor for us to have a shot on it. But we will certainly have an enormously contentious debate in 2016 about what the future of the party is. The Republican Party and the conservative movement has served this country well over its history. We used to have ideas that were relevant to the problems that the country was facing. And if you look at the constellation of problems the country faces, it's incumbent on the Republican Party and candidates to have real solutions, real answers to them, to go out and to sell the American people, not what's fundamentally been going on over here for the last couple of years in Washington. And so I think we'll see this play out. There's going to be an enormous debate. And one thing to remember is that in 1988, in a year where George Herbert Walker Bush won over 400 electoral votes, he got 59% of the white vote. Mitt Romney got about 59% of the white vote, and you had a blowout. And this electorate is going to be 2% less white in the next election than it was in the last one, and 4% less white than it will be from the one in 2008. So
Romney folks didn't get that memo, by the way. Romney folks didn't get that memo.
So we as a party have to run campaigns that are consistent with what the country looks like, and also be relevant on the solution side. And we have a long ways to go.
If I could jump in on that, I agree with everything actually that Steve said. I would say since 1984, nobody to the right of the Republican Party's center of gravity has gotten the Republican presidential nomination. I think there are structural reasons for that. The problem, particularly in recent elections, is that the person who wins the nomination is therefore not trusted by the most conservative wing of the party and doesn't have the freedom of action to be innovative on the message. And I think that you could very easily see somebody like Chris Christie get the nomination over the vociferous objections of a lot of conservatives and not, again, feel free to innovate without reducing Republican enthusiasm. That's the trap. And there's another trap that Republicans have, which is what happened last time. You win a lot of seats in 2010, and this gives you this idea that your message is good and you don't need to change anything, just keep doing what you're doing, without any understanding on the part of a lot of these people that there's a difference between a midterm electorate and a presidential electorate. There's a difference between asking the voters to put you there to be a brake on one party, one unchecked rule, as in 2010, and asking people to give you the driving wheel, give you the steering wheel. And that, I think, could very well play out again in 2014 and 2016. You could have, even with all of this stuff, granted, Republicans are doing their best right now to keep themselves from having a good 2014, but they could still do pretty well, win some seats, particularly in the Senate, even if they don't capture the Senate, and then set themselves up for this, again, another cycle of disappointment in 2016.
So here's my question for everybody, because I think the spirit of this gathering is to try to be disruptive as we talk about politics. So my observation, one of my observations about covering politics is that while there's a lot of voters who want government to solve the problems that the country has, to find solutions to serious challenges, there's another part of the electorate that's very active, that's animated, engaged, is connected via social media versus other media of their choice, and they view it as pure ideological warfare, which is, let's not compromise because it's weakness and because however long it takes, we have to prevail. We have to fight until ultimately we prevail. So are campaigns being run around that latter principle, which is winning the ideological contest no matter how long it takes?
There you go.
Well, they're right. But that is, right, that's one example.
Well, I will say that from someone that works in a lot of Democratic primaries, it is not the same on the left as it is in the right. For many reasons. Well, one is, for liberals, there isn't this same sort of faith in this ideology like that you see on the right, and it certainly isn't the same sort of organizing and that you see on the right.
But that's changed a lot. There's a lot more connective tissue on the left, and a lot more faith in government as an organizing principle.
If that were true, the Wall Street movement would have turned into what the Tea Party did, and you would see them challenging the Democratic establishment in the House the way Tea Party is. But it didn't. I kind of wish it had, but it didn't. I don't think you see the same zeal on the left, at least in the primaries, as I think you see on the right.
But I think that's because the Tea Party sucked in a lot of the independent voters at the time in the country who were sort of anti-government, thought that Republicans had gone too far.
Well, it's also a function of the fact that, part of what animates, the Tea Party and the angst on the Republican side is the fact that we're out of executive power. And the notion that this cycle won't repeat itself with the energy, coming from the left when there's a next Republican president, I don't know that I buy into. But the notion, when you talk about the polarization of politics, this past year, great American Medal of Honor recipient, the late senator from Hawaii, Daniel Inouye, passed away. And Daniel Inouye and Bob Dole spent years together in a hospital room, recovering from their wounds after World War II. And then they went on to serve for decades together in the United States Senate. And I wonder the degree to which you had a generation in this country that understood what real enemies look like. And it wasn't each other. What Lincoln talked about in the context of our bond of affection for each other. And I was always proud when John McCain talked about this out on the campaign trail, that despite whatever differences we may have, that we are all bound together by much more in common than we will ever have in disagreement. And I think that notion, at least in a lot of our politics, has been lost, and it has degenerated into war by other means. And it's extremely unhealthy. And it will certainly be a challenge, I think, for a younger generation to repair the breach that's opened up in our country. And I think that there's fault to be found on all sides of it. But one thing is for sure, the government isn't functioning even at its most basic levels right now. It's closed. This is a self-inflicted crisis. And one thing that I would disagree with Cornell a little bit is that while the Republicans have taken the biggest hit, every institution involved in governing, the president, the presidency, Democrats, everybody's numbers have declined as a result in this. And at the end of the day, we see a further collapse of trust in our institutions of governing, of business, across the board, that is extremely unhealthy in a democratic society. And I do think that this will be a theme in the next presidential election, is who can fix that, who can repair that breach.
And David, this was one of the animating principles of the Obama candidacy in 2008. However, whomever you blame for where we are, there's no question that this is an area where he fell shorter than he wanted to, that he wanted to be able to speak to this divide and heal it, and that hasn't happened yet.
Well, folks here had a front row seat to his election to the Senate and to the presidency, and I guess everyone focuses on, well, he said he would heal Washington. When he talked about change, that was just one part of it. Fundamentally, first was Washington and the country was ducking tough problems, whether it was an economy and the decisions made in the economy to more focus on the middle class for decades, energy, healthcare. And that was first and foremost, the willingness to take those on, and he did at great political cost. We had a catastrophic election in 2010, in part because he saved the American auto industry that was polling at 15% when he did it. He did the Recovery Act, which any right-thinking person helped put the brake on the recession. Healthcare reform, whatever you think about it, had eluded the country for 100 years. So that was first and foremost, which is take on tough challenges, which I think is in short supply in Washington. One thing we need to do is have people from both parties run, and here's one thing the president's election did show. He won from the outside. As a lot of people in the crowd know, in 2003, when he launched his campaign for the United States Senate, nobody gave him a chance to win. All of the institutions were against him in the Democratic Party. And he won. When he ran for the presidency, he's the only real outsider ever to win the presidency. And what that says to people thinking about running for the city council, state rep, Congress of both parties is you can do it from the outside. So even with this polarization, the parties are becoming less and less important, and I think that's really, really important. But there's no doubt, listen, I think Steve's right. There's blame on both sides. We are experiencing a unique moment of Republican dysfunction right now, and the country is not going to do as well as it needs to without a functioning Republican Party that can participate in governing. But to your point about conflict, listen, when I was sitting at the White House in 2011 during the debt ceiling, when you were trying to get a payroll tax passed to help the economy at the end of 11, during the fiscal cliff fight in 12, I won't name them, but there were elected officials in our party saying, hey, this is going great. We're winning the battle. And, guys, it's not about winning the battle. It's about getting something done to help the economy. So that is how, but I will tell you, the media plays a role in this too. Every hour, we don't have a news cycle every day anymore. We have 24 news cycles. Right. And so much of the coverage is who is winning this particular moment. That affects. So I'm not blaming the media, but there is a bunch of factors here, and that because here's what Democratic members of Congress, they read the New York Times, Huffington Post, they watch MSNBC. Republican, the Wall Street Journal editorial board, National Review, Fox. So people are living in their own little distorted funhouses. And that's why somebody like Ted Cruz can credibly make arguments that say we're winning, because they had a protest at the World War II Memorial, and that sort of funhouse conservative media complex is saying they're winning. Same thing on the Democratic side. So you need there's no one thing, but I do think we need better people to run for office who are willing to make tough votes, go out there and stand against their party when it makes sense, and realize they're not there to perpetuate their stay. And you saw this. Listen, a lot of the Democrats who came in after 1974, the Watergate babies, they wanted to hang on to power. You have these Tea Party folks who came in 2010 to run against Washington. They want to stay there. They like serving in Congress. And so it's a big problem. So part of this is just strength and character and the ability to understand that, we got some tough challenges out there. And what's happening right now is they're smiling in Beijing, because they're going to take advantage of our dysfunction, and it's going to hurt our economy in the long term.
Just a few seconds left. I want to stick with you for a second. We talked about the dysfunction on or the divisions on the Republican side as you look at 2016. Do you see much more unity on the Democratic side if Hillary Clinton makes the commitment? Do you see a clear lane for her to the nomination?
Let's let Cornell answer that.
well, we were on a campaign where she had a pretty clear lane once upon a time as well.
Yeah.
Well, look, I think it's different. I mean, you never say never. I mean, truth of the matter is, there may be a Barack Obama in hiding. I don't see it. I mean, you got O'Malley, you got Cuomo, you got a lot of good people. You got Biden, who apparently really wants to run. I just think it's tough for them. Hey now. I just think a lot of us Democrats fell in love with him in that debate when he took on Ryan. Look, you never say never. However, I think she does clear the field this time around, and deservedly so.
Yeah, I think in many respects, she would be able to run the race she wanted to run last time, because she's also a fundamentally stronger candidate. I mean, she served in our so she loses to us. She agrees to come in and serve. She serves as Secretary of State. She was a strong candidate with a big lane last time. I think she's much more enhanced right now. I think our party is more unified. We still have a diverse coalition, but we're not going through what the Republicans are going through right now. It doesn't mean that someone from the left maybe wouldn't run and get 25% of vote in a few states. But I think she'd be a strong candidate. Now, the notion that somehow as if she doesn't run, we're in deep trouble, I don't buy either. We've got a bunch of candidates out there. We've got these demographic advantages. We've got a Republican Party that's quite challenged right now. But presidential elections tend to be competitive. I also don't buy the notion that if she runs, she's going to waltz to the White House. It doesn't happen that way. Nominations for the presidency are worth having, because either party in most years, particularly in an open seat race, has a claim to the nomination. But I think she would be in an enormously strong position to both win the primary and win the presidency. Listen, it may be, Ramesh, you're right, Chris Christie could win the nomination. But I think a lot of things would have to change. I think a lot of Republican base voters would have to say, okay, we're going to be more strategic now. And I don't see that right now. I think Chris Christie may be able to win the New Hampshire primary. Maybe he can win some states like Illinois. But to win in the South,
Carolina, Georgia,
South Carolina, Iowa, West.
Christie's having a better 2013 than Romney had in 2009 or than McCain had in 2005. He has fewer issues where he has deviated from the party line than either of those two candidates. And the sorts of things that people hold against him seem to me to be microscopically small issues to decide primaries on. He will have a group of people who will say never Chris Christie, and they will divide 4 separate ways in the primaries.
I hope you're wrong.
Right.
Hey, as the member of the media is, trying to see who's winning and who's not, Christie Clinton, bring it on for 2016. We're ready for that race. We're going to leave it there. Thank you all very much. For the best. Right here.